Hello and welcome to my podcast. My name is Melissa Snow, and today we're going to be talking about Fort Spokane. I just went to the cemetery of the USA Army base over here, not close to Fort Spokane because it's in Lincoln County, Washington, and I'm in Spokane. So if I'm looking over, that means I'm reading, and then I relate to you guys after. So please forgive me if you guys hear my cat in the background because he is meowing his head off, and I'm trying not to pay attention to it because then he'll quit. All right. So this says Fort Spokane was a frontier outpost in Lincoln, United States. Located in Lincoln County, approximately 50 miles and 80 kilometers west of Spokane, Washington, at the confluence of the Columbia and Spokane rivers in the U.S. Army post was used to separate Colville and Spokane tribes on their reservation from newly established city of Spokane, and the fort was last used in 1929 and was later incorporated into a Lake Roosevelt National Recreation Area and is listed as a National Register of Historic Places. And I have been here, you guys. So, yeah, I've been here to this place. We used to go camping and we used to go fishing, and we'd go for the weekend with my dad when he was alive. And 1 minute, I have to let you go. My cats are freaking out. All right, I'm back. So this says the background: the U.S. Army stationed troops in White Bluffs in Columbia River and Foster Creek in the Okanagan River at Spokane Falls to manage potential unrest among the Colville of Spokane. And Colville has its own thing too, so I'm going to get into that story with it. And the troops at White Bluff and Foster Creek were moved to the post Southern Lake Chelan in 1878, closer to Chief Moses. Difficult to supply Camp Chelan was abandoned, and the troops moved to the new site, Camp Spokane, after Colville Reservation was established in 1872, and Spokane reservations in 1881, and the U.S. Army assumed policing responsibilities in 1890. Sorry about that. I had to go and tell my cats to quit. So then it says, used as an outpost, Fort Spokane was funded in fall of 1880. Lt. Colonel Henry C. Merriman, and he was buried when we saw his grave the other day. He was 2nd Infantry Regiment in Camp of Spokane. It was renamed Fort Spokane in 1882. The 4th Infantry Regiment took over in 1886, and the 16th Infantry Regiment in 1896. Sorry if I can't say that right, I'm sorry. Fort Spokane was strategically located at the convenience of the Columbia River and the south of Spokane River, and 50 miles of 80 kilometers west of northwest of city of Spokane. It was the last Army frontier post established in the Northwest. In 1884, there was about 25 buildings, including 6 barracks, a schoolroom, an ice house, and 2-story administrative building. Eventually, there was about 15 buildings on the post, which included officer quarters, enlisting men barracks, a hospital, chapel, post headquarters, morgue, and Quaker's Master's warehouse, shops, stables, and post trade store. Post served to consolidate older posts like Fort Colville. closer to the people area and the buffer between the Indian reservation and settlers in the area. When the Spanish-American War broke out in 1898, the troops of Fort Spokane were moved elsewhere, and Fort was turned over to the Colville Indian Agency. In 1899, the post became a boarding school for Indian children until 1914, when the post became a tuberculosis sanitarium. For the next 15 years, the site was abandoned by the government in 1929. The National Park Service took over the site in 1960 with only about 4 original buildings remaining from the fort. 4 buildings in the site have been preserved and rare and now are part of the state park. Services Lake Roosevelt National Recreation Area and Restoration, and served as 1884 stable, in 1888 Howard Magazine, in 1889 Reservoir, and 1892 Guardhouse. Fort Spokane and surrounding landscape hold great historic significance for thousands of years in the area, and was gathered place for native tribes fishing in rapids of Spokane River. 1880, the U.S. Army established a fort above the confluence of the Spokane-Columbia rivers. With the start of the Spanish-American War in 1898, the garrison was withdrawal, and troops were sent to more strategic locations. The buildings and lands were turned over to the officers in Indian Affairs to use as an Indian boarding school, which operated from 900s to 1907. After the boarding school closed, the building served as a tuberculosis hospital until 1929. In many ways, the Indian experience, the Fort Spokane microcosm and Indian experience across the United States. And yes, it is haunted. And yes, I probably will end up going down there and finding these buildings and doing a video down there. And then we can, it's only an hour away from here. And then we can do a video and an investigation. And it says the fort today. The National Park Service operations Fort Spokane, a visitor center and a museum. During the summer, the guardhouse is open as the visitor center as a museum. The grounds are open year-round with accessible walking trails. Step back into history with a tour of the museum and exhibits on the grounds. Military of the Indian frontier was different than any Civil War regiment. In many ways, uniform weapons and photographers and the military are exhibited in the historic guardhouse. When the military left 1899, the building was converted into an Indian boarding school run by the government. Photographs and first-hand account of the life and boarding school and exhibits through the guardhouse. All exhibits in the program are free of charge. As Washington Territory begins to grow and attract more settlers looking to make a better life, conflicts between settlers and Indian tribes escalate. Unlike the fixed settlement of pioneers who viewed the land as private property, tribe communities were this fundamental difference in the ways an Indian tribe and white settlers approached land ownership and settlement led to conflicts and terror and land use. In 1860, the United States government began to forcibly remove Washington tribes, established reservations, opened up more land for the settlers. The arrival of the railroads in 1870, all lower for most settlers to arrive by rail, causing the government to move more tribes into reservations. Many tribes already forcing a loss and land saw resentment attempt as an attack on the tribe. While variantly independence by the late 1870s, the small series of armed restricted known as the Indian Wars, arriving in the Pacific Northwest, the Nez Perce War in 1877 and the Bangkok War in 1878, fought over the resettlement and the land despite lead many settlers to call the increased military presence in the area. Our state has a lot of Native Americans, and it's been like the biggest Native American land, and our Spokane means children of the sun. And we do have a lot of Native Americans here, and we do have a tribe that is here, and it's the Spokane tribe. And of course, you just heard what I just said about that. And it says, in 1880, near the Big Bend area where Spokane Columbia rivers meet, Camp Spokane was established, ensure peace between settlers and tribes in the area. The camp was strategically located between both Colville and Indian Reservation and Spokane Indian Reservation by 1882. Camp Spokane was renamed Fort Spokane, and permanent structures were built to house troops, keep prisoners, and hold supplies. By the late 1890s, and threat of clash between settlers and tribes had subsided when the United States entered the Spanish-American War. In 1898, most of the troops. In 1899, the fort was taken over by the Colville Indian Agency, who saw a perfect place. And then they made it a school, like it said in the other one, and the popular opinion decided the other cultures should adopt a protest Western culture of the Indians in order to become part of the civil society, Indian boarding schools, and served as well as reducing a native children into attempting to encourage Colville habits over perceived savage behavior. And the patients here, the children donned Western appeal, took Western names, and learned the variety skill needed and live in civil society. In response to dwindling attendance and the establishment of the day schools on the reservation, the school was converted to a hospital in 1916, where they had the tuberculosis, I think that's what it said, and then it remained a hospital, and it was abandoned in 1929 after 31 years of vacancy in the site, and then now as a national park, like I said in the other part of the buildings. And I will be showing pictures located in the former guardhouse of historic Fort Spokane, the visitor center. The museums are open seasonally from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and each year the facility has no entrance fee. During the summer of 2024, the Fort Spokane Visitor Center and Museum will be open through Monday 9:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. The hours begin May 23rd and September 2nd. For audio description of the park, it shows that on here. A 1882 Camp Spokane was renamed Fort Spokane, and permanent structure and a building house troops, keep prisoners, and hold supplies. Fort Spokane was a frontier outpost in northwest United States, located in Lincoln County, Washington. Fort Spokane was located in junction of Spokane River and Columbia River. Across the Spokane River was the Spokane Indian Reservation. Across the Columbia River was the Colville Indian the Colville Indian Reservation, Chief Joseph and band of Nez Perce camp on the Colville Reservation after he was allowed to return to the Northwest in 1885. The fort was established in 1880 to be a buffer between settlers and Indian reservation. The fort was 45 buildings, and one time 2 buildings were made of bricks, and the guardhouse and the powder magazine. The others were made of wood. The others ones still on the grounds today in the brick buildings. Officers had houses on one side of the grounds. Soldiers had the brick houses on the other side grounds. In the middle of it was the soldiers practiced marching and drills during their free time and played basketball. They had a lot of fun playing basketball. This is the guardhouse. The Fort Spokane, inside they have jail cells and solitary cells where prisoners in fort were kept. The 2 solitary cells were prisoners who committed more serious offenses. Each solitary prisoner was given a blanket and a tin cup. If they were lucky, a newspaper. The common cells could hold 25 men, and soldiers were put in jail for getting into fights after drinking alcohol and trying to run away. There were 2 other rooms for the guards to use. Guards were on watch and 24-hour shifts. During the shifts, they were on duty for 2 hours and off 4 hours and back for 2 hours, etc. for 24 hours. In the other video, Alicia said that they do reenactments at this place, and I have been there when they've done that. I've been past it when I was a kid, and I will include photos for you guys. So I just want to let you know, thank you for watching. My name is Melissa Snow, and I will see you next time on my next podcast video. Thank you for watching me. Peace out, everyone. Bye.